apologize for the delay. It's not Armenian time if we start right at 5 o'clock. Today we're very honored to have Dr. Peroomian to present to us her special book, her fifth book, or the sixth book, My Father, a Man of Courage and Perseverance, a Survivor of Stalin's Gulag. I personally have known Dr. Peroomian for about 15 years or so. I met her, this beautiful, elegant lady, at a Pasadena at an event for Dr. Vach and Bob Dadrian, and I was saying, who is this elegant Chanel lady dressed up, prim, and we befriended, and we've been friends since then. She's been a great mentor to me. She's always encouraged me, and we have our monthly meetings at Foxy's in Glendale to discuss and what projects that I'm working on, and she's always been encouraging to me. Today's event is with National Association for Armenian Studies, and we've been working with this organization since 2006. We've done numerous events, maybe over 80 events, and two of the representatives are here today. So most of our events are done with this organization, and they've been very helpful introducing me to other speakers for future events. Our next event will be in November the 10th, Saturday again. Unfortunately, Saturday is a difficult month, but that's how it's working, the scheduling. Dr. Peroomian has been very busy, so we played with the dates. There's so many conflicting events. So the next event is on a Saturday, November the 10th, and it's called The Hidden Map of Historic Armenia, and will be a presentation by Ani Hovannisian about Armenian churches, as well as with a special guest from Scotland, Mr. Steve Sims, who has been spending the last 35 years measuring and documenting Armenian churches in historic Armenia. And this gentleman is not even Armenian, but he has made his lifelong mission to document Armenian churches. And then also there's a flyer for the upcoming conference at UCLA, which is on November 16th and 17th. If you would like to take the flyers, please do so. If you'd like to be on our email list for future events, you could sign in either NASA or the Ararat Iskija Museum sign-in sheet. Today's program, the way it's going to be, Dr. Peroomian is well known. If I can go Google her name, they'll get about 100 pages about her. And her bio is very extensive. She's done such great work. So the proper way to introduce her visually is through the 10-minute documentary by Dr. Hovannisian, which we'll be showing shortly, prepared by Ani Hovannisian. Afterwards, Dr. Peroomian will give a small presentation about her father, why she wrote the book. And then we have students, 6 students will be joining us and then reading excerpts from the book. And I will just read their names so that we will not be repeating. Tara Peroomian, Lina Peroomian, Aline Abrahamian, Aram Manukian, Adam Gemijian, apologies, and Shant Mehdi Khani. I have to say that, Rubina, you're a very fortunate person to have 2 of your granddaughters to read a chapter from their grandfather's, great-grandfather's history. So with no further ado, we begin with the documentary. Thank you.
Well, it's exciting to participate in congratulating Rubina Minasian Peroomian on her latest production on My Father, an enormously personal and yet also collective story of the times she has frequently done all these activities at her own expense, at her own effort, because of the cause that she wants to further. So I would say, well done, Rubina and Nishan. İskamez kanadile seraşalanka şuramorala diye vekşine fakşala. Habrik.
Thank you, Maggie, for your introduction. You have always been supportive of my work. This is, as you said, the fifth time that I'm having this podium, thanks to you. My previous publications were first introduced here in this venue. And I thank NASER, National Association of Armenian Studies and Research, for co-sponsoring this event with the museum, with Arat Eskijan Museum, as they have always done. And thank you, board members that are here. And I want to thank each and every one of you. I know Saturday is not a good day for coming to a book presentation. You would rather be in a party or going to a family gathering, but you chose to spend some time, at least a couple of hours here with us, and I really thank you, and this really means a lot to me. About 3 weeks ago, this book was presented in Armenia. The National the National Library had initiated and organized the book presentation in Yerevan. And the book was being presented by Academy of Sciences Institute of Archaeology and Ethnography by Professor Gane Shahoyan, a female professor. She talked about a whole hour about this book. I was so amazed to see how deeply she penetrated the book. She just like dissected the book. I was sitting there and amazed, and it was a kind of a perfect example of leader's response. This is a discipline, literary criticism, a school in literary criticism, which is called reader's response, and it advocates that there is a dynamic interaction between the text and the reader. And she presented a perfect example of it. Well, her presentation was so thorough and so nicely done that it provoked a lot of questions. Many of them coming, the Armenian audience, were just bombarding me with questions. When are you going to write this in English, in Armenian? We want to read this in Armenian. I ended up promising them that I will rewrite, I won't translate, because they were saying translate it in Armenian. I will rewrite in Armenian, but the question kept coming, why did you write it in English in the first place? I began to explain to them, and I think I owe it to you to explain why I decided to write this in English. First of all, my target audience was the new generation growing up in the diaspora who are, to say the least, uncomfortable with Armenian books and who know very little about especially that period of history. I wrote it in English because I had the non-Armenians in mind. I know that in the West, people know about Stalinist regime, the rule of terror of Stalin at that period of time, like reading Solzhenitsyn or Rybakov or others, Applebaum or others, but they don't know anything. They have no idea what happened in Armenia. That small republic within Soviet Union, the smallest republic, how discriminatory the treatment of Armenians was, and the conspiracy between Stalin and Beria, they kind of eliminated the cream of the crop, the intellectuals, the nationalistic intellectuals, who had a trace of nationalism in them. They eliminated, they beheaded, they executed the communist leaders, political leaders of Soviet Armenia, who had tried to push a little the interests of the nation. I presented a paper on this topic last summer in Brisbane, Australia, where Professor Hovannisian is there right now in Sydney, Australia. And I want to just thank him a lot because he's been there for me all the time, Professor Hovannisian, whether in presence, in person, or in a video message like this one that you saw. I will cherish this video in my, it's become a part of my memorabilia. Yes, it was in Brisbane, Australia, that I presented a paper during a conference, the Association of, International Association of Genocide Scholars, just to let them know what happened in Armenia and how what Stalin did in Armenia to Armenians was nothing less than genocide, and how it has come in the literature as the second genocide, as the second April 24, when they are talking about 1937 or 1949. And finally, I wrote it in English because I was so sure that they know it in Armenia. Well, of course, what happened to them in Armenia, they should know about it. They lived through the years of Stalinist persecutions. But in that regard, I was mistaken. They know very little about that period of time. And especially the new generation, even within the families that have been the direct victims of Stalinist persecutions, they have been afraid to talk. And the memory, the family history has not been transmitted properly. As to textbooks, there's nothing in the textbook. There is silence, complete silence about that kind of what happened in Armenia during those years of Stalin rule. And 30 years of independence was not enough for Armenian governments to face this period of this shameful, this miserable period of history and deal with it. Of course, we should admit that during this 10 years, last decade, there has been a movement. There are exhibitions, like the one last year on the steps of Hovannisian Museum that was stopped abruptly by the government. And there are conferences, there are young historians that are doing research to dig up the narratives, new documents about this period. But the road is not smooth. The governments have always tried to silence them, to make them forget about this past, this shameful past. I guess they were coming from that same breed. I'm just hoping that in this new Armenia, Nor Hayastanu, the governments, after they solve the problems that arises every day, after solving all these problems, they'll get back to this period of history, they'll face it, and rewrite the history of this period. Of course, after the death of Stalin, there was a short period of political relaxation. We call it Khrushchev thaw. And during this time, some of Armenian intellectuals who had been able to survive the Gulag, the tortures and sufferings of Gulag, and had come back to Armenia, felt courage and stamina and strength to write their memoirs. And they were taking an example of what was happening in Russia, because Russians were also talking about this period of history. But unfortunately, or ironically, censorship in Armenia, in Soviet Armenia, was harsher than anywhere else in the Soviet Union. These books written in the 1960s were only published in 1980s during the Gorbachev era, Gorbachev perestroika. And today, these books are almost forgotten. I guess there should be an effort, a conscious effort, to bring those back to the attention of people again. They should be included in the reading materials, list of materials that the high school students and university students should read. And maybe in that sense, it would be important for me to write my book in Armenian as well. But if I do so, it'll be at the cost of my other academic work that I'm doing, and I always had the intention of writing those books in Armenian. I'm always kind of upset looking back to the warm reception of this book, my book about my father received. And my academic work, the 30 years that I dedicated to the study of Armenian genocide literature, still awaits for its full impact on the field. Well, Nishan, my husband, cools me down. He's the cool-headed in our family, and I'm the nervous one. He says, don't compare these two together. He says, this last one is a personal story, very easy to read, and people can identify with that. And he's true. People can identify with my stories. There are so many people that have come to me saying that they see their lives in it. They see their own story in it. They are transported into the past, and they are living with me the stories that I relate. Like, for instance, one of my girlfriends, I should say this in Armenian, in Hungarian, it's Mega Remen, ասում այդ բաժինը, որ ես կարդացի, որ գրել է իր, մենք շատ անգամ ոչինչ չունեինք ուտելու, մայրս էր միայն աշխատում, հայրս չկար, և երբ որ բակում խաղում էինք երեխաները, they were bragging of having such and such delicious food for lunch and that. Մենք բարեր էինք հնարել, անուններ էինք տալիս այդ ուտելիքներին, ես և քույրս, և իրենց մոտ we were bragging about, oh, we had ghorbe sabzi today, we had the Persian gourmet foods, we had fasanjan today, but actually we had just bread and sometimes cheese with it. She remembers that when she was growing up and she was fatherless too, and her mother worked, her mother was the breadwinner and she worked very late. There were days that they had nothing to eat, so she was boiling water in a pot in the kitchen. But of course the kitchen was a common one for all the neighborhood, the neighbors. There were neighbors like 5, 6 neighbors sharing a kitchen. So she was boiling water with the lid on so that no one would understand that they had nothing to eat. Խաչիկ Թոլորյանը, որ երևի ճանաչում եք իրեն Wesleyan University, Connecticut, he's a literary critic, Armenian literary critic, professor of English and international literature. Գրում է ինձի, մայրս կպատմեր, որ երբ պստիկ աղջիկ մներ, ավելի ունևորներու հագուստ կապուստին չէր նախանձեր, այլ այն բանին, որ անոնք իրենց հորը ձեռք են բռնած եկեղեցի կուքային, երբ կարդացի քու մորդ և Ռուզանի մասին, Ռուզանը քույրս է, այս բոլորը հիշեցի. Armina Hovannisian writes, I too feel so lonely at times with all the people around me, and I too ascribe the founding of Oran to losing my father at a young age. Alan Whitehorn, a half-Armenian genocide scholar, writer, poet, and literary critic in Canada, writes to me, I think my wife knows what your husband experiences about living with the genocide every day. Reading the book about your father, I understand more fully your passionate commitment to remembering the Armenian genocide and human rights. Peter Balakian writes, what an epic story, and I recall your paper in Brisbane this summer and how moving your talk was. And a small excerpt from Dr. Shakeh Kaftaryan's presentation of my book in March, a few months ago in Glendale. She concluded, the author has written this biography as a tribute to her distinguished father and has dedicated it to his memory. I would like to submit to the reader that this book can also be categorized as an autobiography which reads like a historical novel. This volume is a valuable addition to Dr. Rubina Peroomian's significant body of work and a fulfillment of her filial duty to her father. This book is indeed a befitting tribute and testimonial to the memory of a valuable man. As to Dr. Vartan Grigoryan, president of Carnegie Foundation, his letter to me, warm words, and then a telephone call to me just to tell me how he appreciates my work and how thrilled he is reading my book. It just sent me to seventh heaven. But I don't want to go on. I don't want to brag. It's just I want to let you know that how appreciative I am when I hear these things, these comments about my work, about my book, about my father, because it gives me encouragement. It gives me self-confidence that I morbidly lack. And during this process of writing the book, I was faced with some choices to make. Sometimes it became so personal. And I was thinking, should I share this with the reader or just keep it as a family secret? As to the description of horrors and the suffering in the Gulag, in the Siberian labor camps, it was terrible for me to try to describe those. Just like the time when I was reading a lot of genocide literature, memoirs, and I was seeing myself caught in the fire of these deportations, massacres. I was seeing nightmares. Here too, when I was writing this book, I was living my father's life, sometimes in my dreams, sometimes just daydreaming. I was living his life. And just like forgotten, abandoned in that faraway permafrost region of Norilsk, a notorious camp, labor camp in northern Siberia. And my life, just like my life, was hanging to the whim of sleazy Czechists or the warden, that ferocious warden. Here is a scene. I want to give you an example. A young man, a young prisoner, has tried to escape the frozen hell of Siberia. They caught him, brought him back. And as a punishment, and what an unbelievable punishment, they had him stand on the frozen hill, and they poured pails and pails of water on him. In that subarctic climate, 70 degrees below zero, the water froze instantly and sheeted the body alive. The man was turned into a frozen sculpture, ice sculpture, to the honor of great Stalin. After 10 years, 10 months, and 17 days, as my father recalls, my father returned to us physically broken, but with a high spirit. He came to pick up the pieces of our shattered life. He came to continue his struggle for our cause, his fight against all those who still continue, even today, their attempt to bury the national interests, Armenian national interests, and national goals, our ultimate goals. I have tried to do my best as the daughter of a man who devoted his youth, his life to Armenian cause. And the book today has started its own journey into time. It's up to the readers, as the Reader's Response School of Criticism would say. It's up to the readers to keep it alive or just bury it in the ash heap of history. And thank you again for coming. Thank you for listening to me.
Our speakers will be, presenters will be
Tara Peroomian, Lina Peroomian, Aline Abrahamian, Aram Manukian, Adam Gavitian, and Shah Mehdi Khan. Thank you.
July 1954, Kehan, the Persian language daily in Tehran, reports about a group of Iranian prisoners of war, released from Soviet prisons, are turned over to the Iranian government and are being detained in a special camp. Among the detainees is a chemistry professor named Dr. Baghdassar Minasian. The news was both astonishing and incredible. Was it really true? Was our lost one coming back to us after so many years? Or was this another cynical joke played by the press in the context of Iranian-Soviet relations? I know my poor mother could not have taken another blow of disillusionment. Looking back to that day, I can see that it was a turning point in our lives. Nothing remained the same afterwards.
We had no further news of my dad for a long time until one day, Tigran Baghdassarian called me to his office at Alik and asked me to accompany him to a secret meeting. On the way, he told me that they had arranged with the Iranian secret police to allow a short visit with my dad, transferred to Tehran but still in custody, and I was the member of our family privileged to see him before his final release. My heart pounding with fear and anxiety, I entered a room where a well-built officer greeted me in perfect Armenian. I later learned that he was a high-ranking Persian officer in the Iranian secret police. I looked around the room. An emaciated old man stood up and walked toward me with open arms, exclaiming, Ubik-Jan. That must be my father, I thought. He was the only one to call me Ubik in my childhood memory. His only recognizable features were his thick, round-rimmed glasses and his broad forehead that I remembered from old photographs. It was a moment of realization, a dream come true, an answer to my prayers every night for 11 years. God, please bring my dad home.
My father, a man of courage and perseverance, a survivor of Stalin's Gulag. Baghdassar Baghdik Minasian was born on December 10, 1902 in Vogan, a small Armenian village in the heart of forest-covered Qaradagh in Iranian Azerbaijan, Armenian Azerbaijan, which corresponds to the mountainous region of ancient Armenian Barsbatunik, a part of Vaspurakan province in the kingdom of Methhaik. Baghdassar lost his father Khachatur at an early age, and creditors stripped the family of all their belongings, leaving Baghdik's mother, Yekhsapet, in abject poverty with 4 little children to raise. The poor woman took in laundry to earn a scant living for her family. To add to her ordeal, Baghdik, her eldest child, was taken by a creditor to serve as a houseboy in lieu of an unpaid debt. When he was 8 or 9 years old, a rich relative retrieved him from the house of servitude and brought him to his home in Tabriz, where conditions were better for the little orphan boy. He performed chores around the house and ran errands for his patron's shop.
From a young age, I was deprived of motherly love and affection. My school and university years were turbulent and full of deprivation.
Much like Hovannisian's Gikor, the eldest daughter of this wealthy merchant named Maro, Baghdik called her Maro Kulik, noticed the boy's extraordinary zeal for his reading and writing and took charge of teaching him both and providing him with all kinds of books to read. Without setting foot in a classroom, but with hard work and perseverance, Baghdik prepared himself to the elementary school completion examination which he needed to pass in order to enter high school.
After the Sovietization of Armenia, one of the projects undertaken by Dashnaq Tuchun in the diaspora was to educate and train future leaders to carry the torch. A cohort of high-achieving students was chosen to be sent to European universities, there to receive the highest possible level of education, thence to return and serve the Armenian people. Baghdassar was one of the chosen few. He had graduated from high school in 3 years as the best student in his class and had demonstrated his skill and capability in leading the ARF student union. When he was accepted to Charles University in Prague, Universitatis Caroline Pragensis, He began his journey to the heart of enlightenment and education in Europe. Baghdik chose to major in natural sciences, biology, and chemistry as we know today, with a double major in pedagogy. His scant stipend often arrived late, and sometimes he went to school hungry. That was the case on the day he went before a committee of distinguished professors to defend his dissertation. Halfway through, as the professors were blasting him with questions, Baghdik realized that his nose was bleeding. Then he felt his head spinning, his vision went dark, and he almost fainted. He was terrified, fearing he was about to lose all those years of hard work, but the professors understood. They calmed him down, gave him a glass of water, and waited until he recovered and felt able to continue.
My father was now teaching chemistry and physics in Armenian schools in Tehran, and apparently his students loved him. According to one at Davtian High School, there were no Armenian chemistry or physics textbooks at that time. Dr. Minasian, a young and charismatic teacher, brought German and Czech textbooks to class, translated lessons on the spot, and dictated in fluent Armenian. Another student at the co-ed Haikazian High School remembered the exhilaration at having a new teacher who was knowledgeable and strict in the classroom and a pleasant and helpful friend outside.
The flames of war were fast approaching the Caucasus. There was a strong possibility that Turkey would enter the war and that German-Turkish forces would advance on Transcaucasia. There was an even stronger possibility that the Allies would occupy Iran in order to route arms and military supplies to the Soviet Union and halt its defeat. It was a strange situation in Tabriz, neither war nor peace. The Red Army was advancing in Azerbaijan, bringing the Red ideology, the boorish communist mob movement. The future was uncertain and unpredictable. What was evident, though, was that there was fear, there was panic. The ARF Central Committee of Azerbaijan, headquartered in Tabriz, was more concerned about what would happen to Soviet Armenia if the Turks, with the help of German forces, were to move to the east to realize their long-time dream of pan-Turkic expansion. The destruction of Soviet Armenia would become the first step toward the creation of that dream empire. The ARF Central Committee delegated me as the committee's representative to negotiate with Soviet representatives in Tabriz.
Immediately upon occupying Tabriz, the Red Army established its headquarters in the city and declared martial law. All weapons and all radios were to be surrendered to the military command. In an emergency meeting of the ARF Central Committee, it was decided not to surrender weapons. To that effect, a special meeting with Soviet representatives was requested.
I believe the order to surrender all weapons concerns individuals. Our organization certainly owns weapons. We have owned weapons for self-defense in Turkey and Russia, and we have never turned them into the authorities. It's the same here. We will not surrender our arms. But you are in control of the situation. You can confiscate them by force, and let me tell you, it will be over our dead bodies.
At that moment, the red curtain at the back of the room drew open, and a tall, slender Armenian officer came through and approached me with a theatrical gesture. He shook my hand and said, "I salute your position." They offered me a ride home, but I refused. I wasn't sure whether the driver might not change direction and take me to Jufa and cross the border into the Soviet Union. Instead, I asked to have a soldier accompany me to deal with the street patrols. I reached home safe and sound. My wife was sitting on the bed, praying and crying. She was in a state of high anxiety. Right after I had left, she had heard shooting in the street and presumed that I had been shot. The wives of ARF leaders have miserable lives. They suffer, they panic, they are distressed, but they take it all with patience, heroically. They are the real heroes.
It was January 3rd, 1944. Before 11 a.m. that morning, I walked out of David's cafe and headed toward my school. After I finished my work in the chemistry lab there, I walked to Ghazar Makuts's factory, which was located on Pahlavi Avenue near the checkout. He was a member of our central committee, and I periodically visited him and other members of the CC to discuss current issues. As I was passing the checkout building, an Armenian officer grabbed me in the back and said, "Let's go in here, give me your gun." "I don't carry a gun," I replied. By that time, another officer had pushed me through the door. They pulled a sack on my head, which I angrily pulled off. The Chekhov officer explained that they were doing that for my own good, for my reputation, so the neighbors wouldn't recognize me. They covered my face with the lapels of my overcoat and led me like a blind person down to the backyard and into the basement prison. It was cold and humid in that cold winter of Tabriz, with a dirt floor, no windows, and no furniture. I couldn't sit or lie down. Rats would attack my feet and ears. I walked back and forth day and night, smoking all the time. It was during one of those days or nights I couldn't tell the difference when I heard the wailing voice of a child screaming, "Babajan." I was convinced it was my daughter Rubina calling her lost, disappeared father. More than 30 years have passed, and I still haven't forgotten that heart-rending cry.
After 3 days and nights, the prison guard opened the door and took me upstairs to the office. "We are sending you to Yerevan," the officer said. "You will return home in a few days." And then, to frighten me, he turned to the officer who was going to accompany me and ordered, "Kill him if he tries to escape." At daybreak, we reached Julfa on the Iranian-Soviet border. I saw the Araks River and suddenly remembered a dream I had seen 2 years ago. I was strolling with my wife and children when a blue lake spread out before me. My wife and children disappeared. I began calling them and frantically searching for them, but I couldn't see or hear them. I was distraught. I wouldn't see my wife and children anymore. I had woken up and breathed a sigh of relief. Thank God, it was just a dream. And now the river Arak separated me from my wife and children. My dream was coming true. I won't see them again. I was woefully distressed, imagining my children growing up as orphans and suffering as I had suffered in my childhood.
A widow and 2 orphan girls, that was what we were. Residues of Soviet persecution. A happy marriage, 2 little girls growing up in the most caring family atmosphere, and suddenly one night we found ourselves sleeping alone in fear and agony. Our father did not come home. I have little recollection of the turbulent days and months that followed, but I could feel the inexplicable anguish that suddenly cast a dark shadow over our existence and would hold us in its grip for 11 years. The futile search for my father began. Although there was almost no doubt about who was responsible for his disappearance, we had to find out what had happened. Had he been assassinated, abducted, imprisoned, exiled?
My cell was very small, 2 paces wide by 3 or 4 paces long. There was no furniture. During the daytime, I would sit on the bedding. It was forbidden to sleep during the day. There was a small opening in a corner of the ceiling where a dim light entered. My cell was separated from the long corridor by an iron door which had a small door in it with a glass peephole. That was for the guard to check on the prisoner and wake him up with a roar of curses and insults if he dared to sleep during the day. The iron door was opened once in the morning and once at night to let the prisoner out to use the toilet. It was also open to take the prisoner to interrogation, and that usually occurred after 10 o'clock at night. Meals were handed in through the small door. I remained in solitary confinement in that cell for 16 months, enduring endless nightly interrogations, waiting for the bill of indictment that would not come. How unbearable is loneliness. How sad it is to live one's life in solitude, punishment within punishment. One night, I asked my interrogator why my trial was being delayed for so long, and I was surprised to hear that my dossier had been sent to Moscow, where a special council of 3 was going to examine it and decide my fate. Without my presence, without a lawyer to defend my case, without a chance to say my last words. How unfortunate. Free and thriving Armenia was deprived of the right to try, pass judgment, and punish an Armenian who had committed a crime against her.
Extract from Protocol number 37, the verdict and the sentence. It was resolved. Minasian Baghdassar, Baghdik, son of Khachatur, belonging to an anti-revolutionary espionage organization and having terroristic intents, to be confined in corrective labor camp for a period of 10 years.
On April 15, 1945, 16 months after my imprisonment, the iron door to my cell opened for the last time and the prison guard yelled, "Sabiresh Veshami," that is, collect your things. I had nothing to collect, so I walked out. And so began my long and torturous journey to exile.
At the Krasnoyarsk transit camp, the wretched victims of the regime woke up at dawn, and one group after another, they went to the latrine barasha in a corner of the barracks to satisfy their natural needs. Then, the orderlies took the latrine tank out to empty it. The stench was gone, and the air became relatively breathable. Then breakfast was served. A soup made of fish heads and 300 grams of soggy black bread full of sand. The prisoners ate their meal, thanked God, and cursed Father Stalin, the leader of all humanity. The situation in that transit camp was horrible in every respect. Our hair and beard grew like bushes. It was an annoying feeling, but there was nothing to shave with. Anything sharp that could be used to commit suicide or to harm others was confiscated. Yet situations bring about the ingenuity that produces the necessary means, no matter how crude or primitive. An inmate came up with an invention. With cold water and a piece of broken glass he had found, he shaved the prisoners and received 50 grams of bread from each one. Mind you, there was more blood than hair shedding from their faces. It was my turn. All blood. It took me a long time to stop the bleeding.
And those narratives portraying the morbid landscape of the prisoners and labor camps struck me, for they had many themes they all had in common. The crowded, lice and rat-infested prisons, the spine-chilling death-struck or black raven used to transport the prisoners, the ranks of 2 or 3 tiered wooden sleeping platforms with no bedding at all unless it was a worn-out, lice-ridden mattress and a filthy blanket, the sanitary facilities or lack thereof, the inferior quality of the food and the skimpy rations, the impossible workload and the long workday, the primitive tools and equipment provided for work, the terrible subarctic climate, the cruel and inhumane treatment, the humiliation and dehumanization that reduced the inmate with an intellect 100 times that of the crummy warders, or the sleazy Chekists to a mere number, that robbed him of his name, his past, his life, and most abominable of all, the larger-than-life portrait of Stalin, occasionally Stalin and Lenin together, hanging in the mess hall to greet the prisoners, usually with a banner reading, "Long live great and wise Stalin, father of all people."
My father's long and torturous journey took him to his final destination, Norilsk, the Norilsk Lager or labor camp complex. It was one of a number of labor camps in the Soviet Gulag system where between 1934 and 1953, 1,053,829 persons died. But numbers cannot paint the enormity of the calamity. They present cold statistics. Statistics don't bleed, and they don't mean anything to cold-blooded tyrants. As Stalin once said, the death of one man is a tragedy. The death of millions is a statistic. It was literally the survival of the fittest, and if you succumbed to the hardship, the hunger, and the freezing cold winters and died, burial was a luxury denied to you. They would strip you naked, your clothing would go to another prisoner, and dump you in a mass grave without a coffin. Stalin had once said, "Man is the most valuable capital." There was this unimaginably harsh workload, this so-called norm or quota, that detainees were expected to complete every day, and direct proportionality between the food ration and the amount of work completed. My father, sick and frail, was never able to finish his quota. Day in and day out, he must never have had the full ration, consisting of a small piece of soggy, sandy black bread, 6 ounces according to Solzhenitsyn, and a bowl of fish soup. Of course, the soup didn't have a scrap of fish in it, as my father recalled. The pieces of fish were saved for the guards, the warders, and the administrative staff. My father said, "We were lucky if we found just the head of a small fish in our bowl."
Warm clothes and proper boots were crucial in the subarctic climate of Norilsk, but the boots they were given were made of felt that became freezing wet in the snow, and most prisoners' boots were not even the right size. Only boots sent from home were warm and comfortable, but not very many prisoners had family back home who had the means and the audacity to acknowledge their relationship with the prisoner by sending him or her boots or warm clothes. My father received one parcel during the entirety of his years in exile. After 5 years of absolutely no news of his whereabouts, of not even knowing whether he was alive or had been executed by the Soviets, we received a postcard that was supposedly from my father. There was no date on the message, and the dates of the posted and received stamps were illegible. It was certainly written and mailed by someone outside the camp. According to the message, my father was okay, but he was very worried about not having received any news from us. He begged us to write to him, in Russian he advised, and send pictures of ourselves. He also asked for warm clothes, woolen socks, and cigarettes. He beseeched his brother Asadur to help his wife and children, and if possible, to send him a little money.
I was too young to make a decision or advise my mother what to do, but I remember many among our family and friends believed that the message was a hoax and that my mother should not spend money she didn't have to send stuff to an unknown destination. But my mother was resolute. She sold the Persian rug, the sole valuable in our room, a token of our erstwhile comfortable and happy life brought from Tabriz, and prepared a large parcel of clothing, canned food, and cigarettes, together with a letter and photographs. We never heard back, but at least we knew we had done the right thing. Years later, when my father returned from exile, he told us that a very kind and humane member of the camp administration, the type of person rarely met within a labor camp, had done him the favor of writing the message and mailing it to the Soviet embassy in Tehran. Ironically, however, the parcel only caused him more pain and anxiety. He did receive it, but there was almost nothing left in it. That didn't surprise him. He knew it had been looted before it got to him. Of course, there were no photographs and no letter. Surprising for him, however, there was an article of women's underwear in the parcel, which became a source of anxiety. He thought it was a message, a way of letting him know that his wife had been arrested.
Malnutrition and heavy physical labor took their toll on my father. One evening toward the end of a hard day's work, while lugging bricks, he fell down and fainted. A falling brick broke a bone in his foot. He was transported to the camp's hospital where he contracted jaundice, a severe illness that damaged his liver for good and had its detrimental impact at the end. He was released after a month in hospital. The good doctor, a political prisoner himself, told him that he had no hope of saving him, but had cared for him the best he could. My father remembered that doctor as a guardian angel who gave him a second life to endure the hardship and return to his family.
My mother tried to raise us without a complex about having no father to guide us. In the meantime, she made sure that we did not forget our father. She worked hard and life went on. But my mother was losing her health. An unintended cold and cough turned into bronchitis, and soon chronic bronchitis impossible to cure. Her smoking didn't help. The worst time of the day was when she lay down to sleep. Cough syrups didn't help, so she kept a piece of dry bread under her pillow. Somehow, the bread scratching her throat would ease the itching and the cough. My mother never fully recovered or regained her erstwhile happy and lively nature, even after my father returned. Years of constant anxiety and uncertainty, malnutrition, long hours of hard work and smoking had taken a heavy toll on her physical health and her spiritual well-being. The forlorn effects of widowhood, however, remained with her all her life.
My father's return was truly a gift for all of us. He was physically dilapidated, but his stamina and high spirit helped him to regain his old self. He was well aware that he faced many challenges in terms of self-adjusting to society, his immediate and extended family, to the job market, and to the party milieu, none of which remained the same 11 years on. His dedication to the Armenian nation remained the focus of his life, the center stage of his activities. He worked with youth groups lecturing about Armenian history, ARF history, and ideology. He also contributed political analysis to Olig and translated articles from Le Monde and Figaro on current events and burning political issues of the day. After he retired from teaching in Tehran public schools, he devoted himself to Oleg as editor-in-chief and to the ARF.
He passed away in hospital in Tehran on July 13, 1976, succumbing to the acute ulcer he had brought back with him from the Gulag, an ailment that had remained dormant for 22 years, giving his family that much time to enjoy the God-sent gift. A lively soul who had led a difficult but productive life, from Qarabakh to Tabriz, Paris, Prague, Tehran, Ghazvin, and back to Tehran, then Tabriz again. A weary soul who had experienced the anguish of solitary confinement in Yerevan and the misery of the Soviet Gulag. A hopeful soul who had miraculously returned to serve his people and bring joy to his family, was now on his last journey to his resting peace. Appreciated by many, unappreciated by many. Baghdik Minasian was a torment of emotions, a fountain of knowledge and information, a vault of unlikely experiences locked behind the door we did not care to open wide.
Thank you, our bright students. And then if you have any questions, Dr. Rubina will answer the questions. There are books available, and the book is dedicated for her father. She doesn't want to like a donation, $10 donation, which we're going to use, will be appreciated. And then we do have a reception to follow. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Rubina. This concludes our event. Very good idea. Very articulate and really, this is something that's going to really move with us. So, please come on next page.
When you said, oh no, you said, yeah, you said it was great. When you got all the cities, small
our history, so, fast family var, December paperleri, İngilizce var, UCLA library books, library metin, but chapter nargos, there's no making in the open. You take the much, you take the mega set, mega on I see you some, you can say mega, email Buddha, you can say email Buddha, Shraga, Nice, Yes, look, Hungary, North Hungary. I'm a high school teacher, history, public school. So, yes, yes, now I'm 57, yes, in 95, yes, yes, Nikki Chaspes, very nationalist for it. So Martica cannot net Bowen, starting my mind, never say it, you would never asking about it. Ah, you say, Pam, I will have I'm bringing you know, so I don't know how much I'm looking for it, and I'm going to
Yes, neuroscience. I can try.
Correct. Well, this number you put to Sean. Oh, by the way, yes, I got to go to the Himagamas because I didn't go to the University of Melbourne to begin with. I'm not coming from keep to getting that. Anyway, there's sorting there. Anyway, yarın negar adlı anyway, ben aşırı. Uğraman London'da thank you. Mr. Unal, or being so loud, so all history story was there.
Watchmaker.
Watchmaker, I'm not right there.